So we're doing this new series called Jesus is Greater Than. It's a walk through the book of Hebrews, and it's tailored to help us grasp the magnificence of Jesus, who he is, and what living a life in relationship with him looks like. You know, we are still kind of new young parents, as some of you know. We got Brian and Sophie a year ago, so we are back into the parenting gig. And we are kind of catching some interesting things that we missed when we had Carissa when she grew up. And probably many of you who are younger parents now, like us, probably do this too. There's this thing with kids and toys. I don't know if you guys see that too. You know, every time we buy a new toy to Brian and Sophia, they love it. They play with it, they sleep with it, they hug it, they just, you can't separate them from this new toy. But the next day, the fascination drops a little bit. And the next day, it drops even further. And the third day, they have a friend visiting, one of their friends, and they have a different toy. Now, all of a sudden, this toy doesn't seem to be attractive anymore, and they want that toy which their friend has got. And then all their eyes are on that, they fight about it, and then once the friend goes back, they look at their toy, and now this is like, it's time for another new toy. They come back to us. You know, it's funny when we look at them, but interestingly, even for us as grown-up adults, life sometimes becomes like that, isn't it? We kind of go after something, we think that's going to be the cool thing for us. You know, maybe if I get my job is not so great, I switch to this new job, it'll be better, or whatever it may be. And then we realize that everything we discover just stays for a short time, and then it wanes away. Because there's nothing in life that can really satisfy us, excite us, deep down in our hearts than Jesus. And that's what we saw last week, how Jesus is greater than everything, and he alone can satisfy the deepest longings of our heart. You know, Bishop Augustine, who lived in Hippo in Africa in the early centuries, said this: our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. And this quest for seeking God is just there in all cultures, in all countries, in all nations, and all times. But there is another problem to that, is many people today have discounted who this Jesus is, even without checking who he really is. You know, we hear about who is Jesus Christ from the media and from things that we have perceived over time, but we really haven't explored Jesus Christ for who he is, what he said, and then make our conclusions. But there's also another factor that prevents people from actually liking Jesus, and it's those who claim to follow Jesus. You know, people who claim to be Christians, and yet they are so unlike Jesus Christ. And unfortunately, most churches, we have so many people who are fitting that category that it becomes a difficulty for those who don't know Jesus to really believe, well, if I believe Jesus, am I going to be just like this guy? I mean, there's nothing much different between us. So today's portion we are looking at is kind of more geared to the second group of people. And this is a letter that was written to a church that was filled with very religious people, but that was actually about to go through a very difficult time. And so I want to encourage us this morning. I don't know which side of the camp you are. If you have not really explored who Jesus is, I'd love to encourage you to come and check him out. You know, we did this fascinating study last week on what is Jesus greater than. And we found that Jesus, first of all, is greater than everything he possesses. And so we need to seek him rather than what he gives us. And we saw Jesus is greater than the most splendid, beautiful things he has ever created. So we need to seek him than what he has created in the world. We saw that Jesus is greater than the best of human character, the best human being you've ever seen. He's far greater than that because he has the radiance of the glory of God. And we saw what the glory of God means, the weightiness of it, the intensity of it. And finally, we saw Jesus is greater than all prophets, all priests, and all kings who ever lived because they all converge in him. He is the ultimate truth. We're used to this saying, oh, all truths are one. Well, no, no, no. All truths point to him as the absolute truth. If you look at all the religions in the world, every religion acknowledges there's actually a problem, right? It doesn't matter what religion it is, or even if you're not a religious person, the world's messed up. And so, what's the solution? And most religions say there are only three categories. You can combine whatever religions or philosophies into them. The first category says you can fix it by yourself. And in this category, you can put all the world's major religions and philosophies in it. If you believe in God, you choose a religion that says, oh, you do this, this, and this, and you can please God, and you can earn your way. Or if you don't believe in religion or God, you kind of end up saying, well, you just have to be a good person. Well, the problem is the definition of good. Who defines what it is? Then the second group of people who see the enormity of the problem, the world is so messed up, and they don't say you fix it, you escape it. And that's where this meditation and all these other aspects come in. But then we have the third category, which is what Jesus provides for us. He says you can't fix it. You can't escape it either. And therefore, he says, I'm going to fix it. And instead of escaping the pain and the suffering and the brokenness, I'm going to absorb that on myself on the cross for all of humanity. There's no one else who has done that in the history. And therefore, if this Jesus is someone whom you have not experienced, I want to encourage you this morning to check him out and to see who he really is, how he can be greater than everything you ever imagined, and he will blow your hearts and your minds and radically change your lives. But for those of us who claim to know him and who claim to have walked with him for a long time, this passage is addressed to us. As software engineers, I know you guys all love writing code. I hate writing code. I went to a very first programming language class called BASIC, and I just barely got like 60%. I was waiting to get out of it. I couldn't do this, then that, and you have to be careful on the dots, on the punctuation. If you drop a comma, the program doesn't run. I can't do that. So I thought I'll torture you guys today with that, and that's the title of my sermon, If Then. How about that? We're going to go through this passage and see if this, then what? And there are three if-thens that I want to talk to us today. And the first one we start with this Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1. It says, therefore, we must pay closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. And there are two words I want to zoom in here. It talks of paying close attention and drifting away. The Greek words actually that behind this refer to terminologies used in the shipping world, in the nautical world. The first word, paying closer attention, proseko, means to anchor a ship, to moor a ship, to tie it up. If you've ever been on boat rides and stuff, you see how when the ship comes to dock, they drop the anchor and tie it up. And the second word that's used is called being drifting away, is when a ship loses its anchor, and then you see it just drifts away. So the first if then is very simple. If we lose our anchor, then we will drift. Now, what are we talking about here? What is the author actually encouraging us to do? What he is warning is, do you have an anchored life? Who is your anchor? What do you put the most faith in for life? Is it in your finances, in your ability, or in the company you work for, or is it Christ? If Jesus is not your anchor, says you're going to drift away. And drifting, if you know, is a very small, slow process. People don't rapidly drift. It happens in a very slow and a gradual manner. You know, I've sometimes fish on lakes, and I have, when you're fishing, the annoying thing is when you see someone coming with a boat, because you kind of feel this guy has an unfair advantage, and somehow you're thinking in your mind, he's going to take all the fishes and go. You know, it's just like so annoying. But there was once this guy who came and he stopped, and he was so focused on fishing, he was casting everywhere, but his boat drifted away and literally hit the rocks on the edge. I was a little happy for him for a while, but it's not fun to have your boat get tangled up and banged up on the shore, because he never realized his boat was drifting. He was so focused on his fishing, he forgot to see where his bearings are. But it was slow, and it took him off. You know, most Christians today, they're not into anything bad. Many Christians don't commit murder. I'm talking of the majority. Most Christians don't commit adultery. Most Christians don't steal. But here's an author, he says, you know what is the biggest problem or the sin of Christians today? Drifting is the besetting sin of the day. Because Christians neglect their anchor, and they begin to quietly drift away. So if Jesus is greater than all these things we spoke about, then he demands a response from us. You know, I was looking up at statistics of people who get married. I think most of us know that almost 50% of marriages end up in divorce. I mean, it's true in all developed countries, and it's also true in developing countries, except people just don't leave, but they stay together. And what they found very interesting was most divorces happen after 8 years of getting married. And for those of you who are less than 8, you guys are still in the sweet spot of marriage. Enjoy it, relish it. But those of us who have crossed 8 years, even though you may not be divorced or thinking about it, you can see the tension building up in the relationship, because you now begin to see how so very different you are from your spouse. And just the years, the number of years of being in the same relationship day in, day out, seeing the same face which was so beautiful on the marriage day, but it's ugly when you wake up and see the first thing in the morning, before any makeup or hairdo and all that. And to realize, I got to live with this person for I don't know how many more years. It's a slow drift. It's just years. The first cause of drifting away is just being in it for a long time. And it's the same for many Christians, you know. You've just been a Christian for so long, you don't know how long, but somewhere, somehow, your anchor, Christ, is lost. You stopped seeing his face, and you're drifting, and you don't even know you're drifting. You know, there was an expedition to the North Pole that was led by a very famous Navy commander. And he wanted to aggressively take his crew and reach the North Pole, but the ships couldn't go beyond a point because of all the glaciers that were preventing. So he stopped the ship, and they actually started trekking on ice. They started hiking on ice so that they can reach the North Pole before a particular time, because you know time and sunset and all those things are possible. So he worked his crew so hard, they kept walking and walking and walking. And finally, when they pitched their tent at a place and they checked their bearings, strange enough, they found they were further south than north. Because what had happened was they didn't realize they were walking and trekking on this glacial pile that was drifting away from the North Pole. They kept walking north, but the glacier was drifting south. And they did not even realize, despite having all the best gadgets. You know, when we lose our sight of the North Pole, our anchor Christ, nothing catastrophic happens, but just this drifting takes place. And then our lives begin to show that. You know, the second cause of drifting as Christians happens because of familiarity. And I remember the very first time I came to San Francisco in Bay Area, I was super excited because I wanted to see the Golden Gate Bridge. So I went with my friend, and we were driving through the Golden Gate Bridge. And as we were driving through the bridge, I was just taking pictures of this pillar and that bridge. I was just so excited. I'm actually driving on Golden Gate Bridge. I loved the Golden Gate Bridge so much that I really wanted to run on it, so I ended up doing 2 half marathons just because you can run on the Golden Gate Bridge. It was fantastic. But if you've lived in the Bay Area for a long time, and if you had friends visiting you from other places for a long time, this is the standard thing that you do, which is you take them to see the Golden Gate Bridge. Now I have seen the Golden Gate Bridge more than 20, 30 times. I've lost count. But you know what happens now when I pass through the Golden Gate Bridge? I don't look at the awesomeness of the bridge. I don't look at the vastness of the waters beneath us. I don't look at the beautiful skyline of San Francisco City. I'm just looking at the traffic right in front of me. And it's so irritating for me to stay in this traffic. I forget and don't realize I'm on Golden Gate Bridge anymore, something that gave me this kick and this excitement when I first saw it. Familiarity breeds contempt. Maybe when we first came to know about who Jesus Christ is, we were so excited. We saw how awesome he was. We were reading about him. We were spending time with him, and it was real. It was beautiful. But later on, we saw that it's slowly started sizzling out. And at some places, it says you lost your first love. It's not about doing religion. You thought you were doing all the right stuff, like these guys who thought they were trekking down to the North Pole. It was a lot of labor. They were working hard. They were hiking. But they were drifting away. So we can do a lot of religion. We can get involved in so many things and be busy and actually think we are doing great. But heart of hearts, we could be drifting away and not even catching yourself doing that. The third reason why we could drift is very simple. These are all very simple things, but have lethal consequences. Busyness in life. You know, there's only one thing people boast about anywhere in the Bay Area when you go to meet them. And the first thing they say is how busy they are. Man, you know how busy I am? You should actually feel sad about it. Just get a life. You don't have a life. But we are so proud that we are busy, but busyness just takes our focus away in seeing how we need to take care of ourselves, our souls. And rather we spend it on things that we think are important, but we know is not at the end. And the last thing could be just pleasure. You know, once our basic needs are met, we live a reasonably comfortable life. Now we are thinking, I deserve something more. You know, I've worked so hard. Man, I've done this 80-hour week, and I need to just chill this weekend. And I seek pleasure. And it's a pleasure that we know doesn't last long. But we want to go for it, and we realize anything we try doesn't stay longer. So if we lose our anchor, then we drift away. Is Christ our anchor in life still? Are you connected to your anchor? Or are we drifting this morning? The second thing is the consequence of drifting away. If we drift away, then we actually can be lost without hope. You know, this verse that was read, we talked about, is for since the message declared by angels proved to be reliable, and every transgression or disobedience received a just retribution, how shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? You know, to put it in simple terms, you know, God gave the 10 Commandments through Moses, through angels who were there. The 10 Commandments were pretty basic stuff. Everyone agrees to that, right? Don't steal, don't murder, don't commit adultery, and obey your parents, and obey the rules of the land. And we all know that if you break any of those things, there are significant consequences. I mean, if you kill someone, you don't have to kill them literally. You can kill people with your words, which is what Jesus spoke about later on. Those relationships can be destroyed, and families can crumble. And if we are desiring what somebody else has, that can take the joy away from our life. And we know when you're driving on the freeway, if you break the rules, if you're doing 90 on a 65 zone and you see a a cop flashing his blue lights behind you. It's not a good feeling, isn't it? Kind of makes you scared and nervous. And we know that even if we break these things that were simple laws, that actually has consequences. And now, God says, He has sent Jesus Christ, who is bigger than all the law. He is the ultimate priest, the ultimate prophet, the ultimate king. And He's actually giving a cure for our hearts. He says, I know you're messed up. I know there's pain in the world. I know there's pain in your life. I know there's brokenness in the world. I know there's brokenness in your life. And I want to come help. And if we walk away from that, if we don't look at Him, if we don't seek Him, we can be lost because there's pretty much nothing available to fix us or to fix the world. And it's kind of a warning. He's very strong and intense when he says that it's because it's not just for those who deny who Jesus is, it's also for those who just drift away. And then comes the hopeful thing. It says, the third point, if Jesus is greater than everything, then we can return and be revived. I had a friend whose cousin sister was abducted when she was a teenager, nearly like 30 years ago, right here in the Bay Area. And she finally escaped from her abductors and was desperately trying to seek who her family is, where they are, and how to reconnect with them. And it took her 30 years to finally find her family, and they got to reunite. And he was showing us pictures of that. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. For 30 years, she was lost. She didn't know where she belonged. She was living a life that was pathetic and painful and horrible. But she was always seeking to reconnect with the family, and that really brought everything back into her life. And God wants us to come back to Him. And He says that He took the first step. It says, it was declared at first by the Lord and attested to us by those who heard, while God also bore witness by signs and wonders and miracles and by the gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to His will. Jesus Christ, He came into this world to show us the way back. That's His teachings in the gospel tell us how we can get back to God. His Sermon on the Mount is one of the most impactful sermons or speeches that have ever been heard by anyone. It has changed nations. It has changed individuals. He talks of how we can actually experience blessedness, a sense of joy that is not connected to anything that happens around us. And he says it starts with actually being authentic in our heart and acknowledging we have issues and really feeling sorry about it and seeking a better path and coming to Him. And it's not just that. There are 4 Gospels that are written about the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. And if you're someone who's never experienced or known who Jesus is, I'd love to encourage you to do that. We have some Bibles we'd love to pass on to you as well, so you can for firsthand explore Him. And not just that. The rubber meets the road. The test is what happens to people who believe in this message. And there were 12 disciples of Jesus Christ, ordinary men and women like you and me. Many of them had major problems in life. One of His disciples, Peter, was a very impulsive guy. And he actually denied who Jesus was when he was put into a corner. And there was a disciple who was always doubting Him. And in fact, all of His disciples literally deserted Him on the cross. But when they saw Christ resurrected, their lives were transformed. And every single one of them lived radical lives that literally changed the world and was the dawn of the Western civilization. And Jesus did this and continues to do this in all of our lives. He answers our prayers. He does miracles. But despite all of this, something radical happened when Jesus was on the cross. This author says that Jesus was God's final word. God was speaking so many thousands of years in bits and pieces, and finally He has spoken to us through Jesus. But when Jesus was on the cross, God stopped talking to Him. He turned his face away. Christ was silenced on the cross because he absorbed the consequences of all our actions upon him. Does this melt our hearts? Is there anyone who would do this for us? And that's why he says the first word, take this seriously. The word literally translated is be furiously obsessed with who this Jesus is. If you have never encountered this Jesus Christ in your life, I'd like to encourage you to check him out today. We have resources at the back that we can pass on, and we'd like to invite you to come join some of our small groups as people study who Jesus is, what were his teachings, how did he live, and how that can help us in our lives to be better men and women. And we are so joyful today that we get an opportunity to get to know our neighbors and meet everyone right after this, and we want to invite you all to join us for that as well, so that we can get to know people and see how this Jesus is making a difference in lives. Shall we pray?